Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining today's Dods Research webinar on private members bills. So, those of you who aren't aware, Dods Research is a collaboration with Queen Mary University, and we can put together some policy research papers, anything that you may be interested in and you'd like to commission. And if there is something that is on your agenda that you haven't done those research pieces on just yet, please reach out to us and let us know. As I'm sure you're also aware, we will soon be welcoming a new King's Speech, and with that, there'll be a whole new private members bill ballot process. And so this morning is a fantastic time to explore the realities of that process, how MPs put their ideas for legislation together, and we can get some valuable insight into the pressure that MPs have to balance along the way. Before I introduce today's guest, I just want to flag that you are all welcome to post your own questions at any point over the next hour. Please do so in the Q&A box, and I'll happily put them to our guests. If you also have any topics that you'd like to see a Dods Research webinar on, please let us know, again, either in the comments or send us an email. So, without further ado, I am really pleased to be able to introduce Max Wilkinson. Max is the Liberal Democrat MP for Cheltenham and also serves as the Liberal Democrat Home Affairs spokesperson. Today, we won't be discussing Liberal Democrat Home Affairs policy. If you are wanting to know what Max's views are on certain topics and the Lib Dems policies around there, there's plenty of interviews out there on the TV, and I would recommend some of Max's interviews on GB News specifically. Max is actually here to discuss his being drawn second in the most recent private members bill ballot, which Max used to introduce the New Homes Solar Generation Bill, wonderfully colloquially known as the Sunshine Bill. And that gives Max a particularly valuable perspective on how that process works in practice, from shaping an idea to navigating parliamentary time and engaging with the government. We're really looking forward to hearing more about your experience, Max, and what that tells us about the realities of private members' bills. So, Max, thank you for joining us today. And I wonder if you could just give us a brief overview of how that process has worked for you.
Thank you, Dean, and thanks for promoting my GB News interviews. I always enjoy going on that channel. At the home of free speech, of course. So, as the private members bill almost winner, I've got a sort of strange insight into the way this process works. And of course, there's different types of private members bills, and it's important to state at the start, right? Any MP can just turn up and present a one-line bill or a bill of any level of detail they like in Parliament, and that happens pretty regularly. What we're talking about today is not that, and we're not talking about the 10-minute rule bills that you sometimes see where people get 10 minutes to stand up and make a speech and then someone else can oppose them, and then if they do oppose them, there's a division and an actual vote, and that's happened a couple of times in this Parliament. What we're talking about here is ballot bills, and that's a specific type of private members bill that comes forward, and it can be presented by an MP who wins the raffle. And it's a very strange part of our democracy. I'm not sure it shows that we have a particularly healthy democracy, although it's a really good opportunity for backbench MPs to start a process, start a campaign, highlight something that they're particularly concerned about, or where they think there's a gap in policy and the government needs to be nudged along, and more on that later on, because I think my bill was one of those ones that nudged the government into a position that they probably were trying to get to anyway. But it's very odd. So effectively, you walk into the no lobby about, I think, maybe a week before the ballot takes place, and you put your name in a book, and you put your name against a number, and I think the top number was 500. I was going to go for, I think the highest number I could find. 500 wasn't available, so I went for 499, if I recall. And it is literally writing your name in a book. And then it's a bit like the FA Cup draw, and you can see it. There's a video online, and the chair of Ways and Means, so the Deputy Speaker, Nusgani, did the draw on the day, and that was on the 5th of September. I'd actually forgot that I'd entered, and I didn't know that the draw was taking place, because I was so busy with my inbox and trying to, as a new MP, employ members of staff, and I was unaware that I'd come out as the 19th bull. And it's the 19th out of 20, which means I'd come second in the draw. And a colleague found me walking across members' lobby, which is the bit just outside the House of Commons, and said, "Oh, congratulations!" And I said, Why are you telling me congratulations?" And he said, "Oh, you've just won the private members bill ballot." Oh, actually, you came second. So what that means in practice is that I got to pick I got second pick of the dates of Fridays in the sort of coming year in Parliament. And at that point, at the point at which it became public knowledge that I'd come out of the bill draw second, my inbox exploded, and I was being lobbied very, very heavily by different campaign organisations, different private sector organisations, industry groups, to bring forward a bill that would be basically them saying, "Here is the thing that we've got ready for you to go, and you should present it." And some examples of some really good approaches that I had, which I think is probably useful for the people on the webinar today. At the FA, I think, was the first email I had, and they wanted me to take forward the private members bill, which they had ready, and it was, I think, existing from the previous Parliament, on turnstile dodging, effectively, people being able to just kind of blast through the turnstiles to get. And that arose as a result of the Euros final at Wembley, where lots of people broke in effectively. The 0 Hour campaign, which was a really valid and useful campaign as well. And also Dignity in Dying got in touch. And they were three of the most effective lobbying campaigns that were running. And actually, what was effective about those campaigns is that they went for me as the second person in the ballot, but also they were pursuing everyone who came out in the top 20. And it was very clear to me that even if I hadn't picked one of those, they would probably get their voice heard as part of this process. And of course, we all know that Kim Leadbeater, who was top of the bill, ended up going for the assisted dying bill. I think Lindsay Farnsworth dodging private members bill, and obviously the 0 Hour campaign was taken by my colleague Ros Savage, who was number 4 on the list, so she got time as well. So there were, if you want to look at examples, public affairs campaigns lobbying MPs to get in get time in Parliament to raise campaigns. Those were 3 really good ones. I can talk for as long as you like, Dean, and you can nod or shake your head and tell me to shut up. But basically, in summary, what I did from there was I decided I wanted to do something that was quite distinct and something that would be obvious as a good idea, something that I thought the government probably needed nudging onwards with anyway, and I thought they were moving in that direction. So I went for the Sunshine Bill, and that was a pretty successful campaign. It helped nudge the government along. They've obviously, in the last couple of weeks, announced that actually the new regulations for having solar panels on all new build roofs are going to come into force in 2028. Which is a big campaign success. It had cross-party support, and I gathered some of that, and you will ask me some questions, and questions will come through, so I'll dwell on that a bit later on. In terms of some of the more technical bits, I think it's just useful for me to say that it's not just me on my own as an MP with my researchers working on this. There is support from the Public Bills Office, and they're absolutely terrific. The Public Bills Office is a great group of people to know if you're an MP. And the private members bill clerk in the Public Bills Office is Anne-Marie Griffiths, and she was extremely helpful to me as a brand new MP, and she made sure that I followed that process and that I got everything done to time, and that I ended up in the right place at the right time to present the first reading of my bill, which we called the New Homes Brackets Solar Generation Bill. And I worked with a few organisations along the way to make sure that the technical bits of the bill were all correct, and we were putting something forward that was not laughable and that it would stand up to scrutiny. And I will briefly reflect that actually my experience of working with the Labour whips, the government whips and ministers was actually pretty positive on this. And I found that as a new MP, the guidance that I got from the clerks, from other MPs, and indeed the government, working with them to make sure that we got something that was useful on the day and actually took the campaign forward, pretty useful. So I'll leave it there because I don't want to speak for far too long, and then we will bring out loads of stuff in the Q&A, I'm sure.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thanks for that brief summary there, Max. And I will never tell you to shut up. I always enjoy hearing about how Parliament works, and having been there myself and worked inside it, I can also attest to how helpful the bill office can be, certainly. So take us back to the entering of the ballot. I know you say you know there's lots of things going on for a newly elected MP. Did you have any sort of idea of legislation in mind when you did enter that ballot, or were you completely open-minded as to what it could be?
When I entered the ballot, I thought there was such a slim chance of winning that I didn't even bother thinking about it.
Hmm.
And because as a new MP, there were hundreds of emails coming into my inbox every single day, and I had two members of staff who were just about employed by that point.
Hmm.
I was in a position where I was just trying to get from one day to the next. And I think probably, many MPs end up in that scenario at various times, whether they're new or whether they've been there for a longer time. But as a new MP, it was really treading water at that stage.
Yeah.
When my ball came out, the first thing I thought, or when I was told by my friend Tom Gordon, who told me in members lobby that my ball had come out, the first thing I thought was, I probably want to do something that isn't going to make my life as a new MP explode, right? So, for
Right.
example, had I done the dignity in dying, assisted dying bill, we've seen whether we are for or against it, right? We've seen the pressure that has put on Kim herself, and she's been incredibly brave to take on that task. But that's been her life, I would imagine, for the last sort of 18 months or so, because there's been a huge amount of work that has been put upon her. She's had to sort of lead it through a bill committee. She's had to do a huge amount of media. It's a really high profile campaign. Ros Savage very bravely took on the net zero campaign, the 0 hour. And she had a huge amount of incoming correspondence as part of that as well. And she had a huge amount of support from the campaign, but I would suggest probably also at the same time as a new MP, she probably ended up with a huge amount of extra work while she was still trying to employ staff and get stuff done. And even had she been, Kim obviously is an experienced MP
Yeah.
and had a pretty decent profile anyway, knew how to deal with the media in a way that a lot of MPs didn't as a result of the way she came into Parliament and her experiences. Ros, as a new MP, did really well with that. What I wanted was to make sure that I ended up in a position where I was doing something that was aligned with what I thought the values were of my constituency, something that would be seen as a common sense solution to a problem that was out there, and something that was in line with my own personal values. And as a Liberal Democrat MP, I'm pretty pro-environment. As an individual, I'm pretty pro solving the housing crisis. And I think that the cost of living issue is something that all governments over the last few years have completely failed to grapple properly with common sense solutions. And also, I had noticed over a long period of time that the proposal for making homes, net zero, carbon neutral, energy efficient, call it what you like, use whichever definition you want. Actually, the legislation had moved forward really, really slowly. And that's something that I found a personal frustration. And, weirdly, go and knock on doors whenever there's a housing development being built somewhere nearby. People will talk about all sorts of things, schools, hospital places, GP surgeries, but also they'll say, and why aren't they just all having solar panels on the roof? And it's kind of just one of those common sense things that the country hasn't quite got its head around. And that's how I kind of came to that idea. And actually, the way that I pitched it, I went into an APPG for net zero meeting, and there were lots of people around the room, and I just, Alex Sopel, who is the APPG chair, opened it up for a chat. I put my hand up and I said, well, I've just come second out of the private members bill ballot. So, and what I want to do is something to do with energy efficiency and the environment and housing. If any of you have got any ideas and you'd like to help, let me know. And a guy called David Cowdery from the MCS Foundation, the Micro Generation Something Society. They got in touch. He got in touch and gave me an awful lot of help from the off. And then I used various contacts that I had in industry to sort of build a bit of momentum. I'll come on to that later on.
Fab. Yeah, I had a couple. couple of my colleagues were in the room actually for that APPG. So, and they came back and told me how that you had opened the floodgates there by asking everyone if they had any ideas for legislation. So I'm glad there was something useful coming out of it. We have had a question come in asking if there is a list of bills that an MP can choose from when it comes to PMB ballot. I have a feeling there isn't, but what you're saying is a lot of stakeholders or interested organisations can get in touch with their ideas to let you know about them and lobby you back.
Absolutely. And I would say anyone who works for an industry association or a trade body, or whether you're in the third sector as a charity, or even if you're just someone with a bugbear that you think needs to be solved to do with anything that's to do with your professional life or anything you're campaigning on, have something ready to go. Whether you don't need to have a fully written bill, because there is help that clerks will provide MPs with that. But if the more detail you can put into it, the better. Have something ready to go, and as soon as the ballot happens, work out who's there, and then fire off a few emails to a few MPs. The ones that caught my eye actually were not the ones where someone had written 500 words, because to be frank, I didn't have time to read 500-word emails. And as an MP, I have a huge amount of incoming correspondence. It was the catchy subject line and then a short summary about why it would be useful for me. Those are the ones that caught my eye. Obviously, I ended up doing something different and bringing my own idea forward. But if you are on this call and you're interested in making contact with someone who wins the next ballot, I would say make it punchy, make it eye-catching, and just fire off an email and ask for a meeting. And don't be offended if you don't hear back, because MPs quite often just don't have the time to respond to this sort of thing.
Thanks, Max. And actually, that brings us basically into another question as well about how those lobbying the best ones worked. People have asked whether were they calling you, emailing, asking other MPs to get in touch with you, or just using the sort of public lobbying channels.
There were emails, some sort of, I think I had some direct messages on LinkedIn. There weren't very many approaches on social media that I received from people,
Okay,
which is a good thing. I did end up having contact from some MPs who were already in touch with various campaign groups as well. For example, there was a Liberal Democrat MP who was in touch with the Dignity in Dying campaign, who then put me in touch, and then we had an initial chat. And I just sort of said, look, I don't think this is for me, because as a new member of Parliament, even though I'm broadly supportive of the principle, it will definitely blow up and take over my life, and you should find somebody who is better able to deal with it. And they found Kim, which worked really well for them.
sure.
There were some people who sort of hung around in Portcullis House. They seemed to sort of have endless meetings with various MPs that they did know, or that they had passes into Portcullis House because they were allied to APPGs, or maybe they worked for an MP or a member of the House of Lords or whatever, and they would kind of try to nobble me as I was passing them. And I would say that's actually not a bad way of going for it. If you can get into Portcullis House and find some time just to sit there and wait for the MP to come past you and make personal contact, that wasn't a bad way of getting in touch with me. So I think you just got to be kind of creative and innovative and sweat your contacts book as it exists. There's always a way to try to get at somebody or to somebody who might want to talk. And particularly if you think there is an alignment of values between that MP and the thing that you are trying to propose, I reckon go for it in any way that you think is appropriate, but don't send them direct messages on Facebook or X or that kind of thing, because most MPs are probably not looking at that, and they might have a comms person who's working part-time who then might send the message on, but quite often probably won't send the message on. So you use the more traditional methods. I think I had some letters as well via the post, which
Right.
worked quite well, because I didn't have anyone to open it apart from me at that stage. But most of the time, the parliamentary researchers and parliamentary assistants are going to be opening the mail, and maybe they will pick it up, maybe they won't, but they're the usual first sift. So I would say go for a broad approach.
Yeah, yeah. I would also recommend Portcullis House, if not just for the breakfast, because I do miss those. Um, my next question actually is around you mentioned the party, like several other Liberal Lib Dem MPs were drawn in the ballot. I wanted to know if there were any discussions within the party about what MPs should be using without revealing too many trade secrets. But was there a pressure there to align with manifesto pledges?
None at all. It was very much. We had a meeting in with Wendy Chamberlain, those of us who were drawn out of the ballot, and Wendy was one of those people who was drawn out of the ballot, and a member of our whips team, a guy called Jack Coulson, who's recently moved on. He gave us some guidance, and we had a senior advisor from the what we call the parliamentary advisors unit. They were in the room as well. And we had a chat. There was no suggestion that we should do things that were Lib Dem manifesto pledges or anything like that. Of course, I was at the top of the list. Wendy and Danny were much lower. Wendy Chamberlain and Danny Chambers, they were much lower down the list. And Danny took, I think, what was basically, they call them a handout bill from the government. And he ended up doing puppy smuggling. Now, the handout bill from the government, I wasn't part of that process, but I don't think they sort of say, you must do this. I think they say, these are the topics that we would like to try to kind of solve. And would you like to, and they email around to all the whips offices and say, if you've got anyone at the private members bill ballot who is, in the top 20 or whatever, these are the things that the government would like to look at. And Danny took on puppy smuggling and ran a really very successful campaign to make sure that got through. And of course, if you take one that the government is attempting to solve anyway, then the government will usually find time on a Friday to get that bill heard. And there was a very strange moment after the very long and emotional second reading of the assisted dying bill that Kim brought forward, where there was a very small amount of time at the end of the day where Danny's puppy smuggling bill was brought forward, and he made a very short speech, and then Minister Mary Cray kind of said, well, yes, we're happy with this, and we're happy to support the private members bill. So there was this really odd moment where the chamber had almost entirely cleared, apart from a chunk of Lib Dem MPs and Danny presenting his bill. And he managed to get one through almost kind of with no resistance from the government, which wasn't quite the same approach that I ended up taking, but I'm sure, get onto that later on.
Yeah, well, I mean, perfect time to go into it now, I suppose. We understand that there was a position where the government maybe rejected the idea, but then they have adopted the policy in some aspects. So what was the engagement like that you had with the government or across your process?
I think it sort of relies on being a self-starter, like a lot of being a politician and an MP. If you sort of kind of leave it and then you drift to the end and then you wait for the government whips to contact you, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Eventually, because I was brand new and I was trying to do other stuff, I spoke to my whip's office and I said, "How do I get in touch with the government whips?" And Anne Marie in the public bills office had already said, "Have a chat with the government whips." But I had no idea how to get in touch with Christian Wakeford. I knew who he was, but he was always floating around looking extremely busy all over the place. He was actually in the end very approachable. And in the first instance, had a chat with him, and I had heard that Labour was going to put its MPs on a 3-line whip to make them vote down whatever bill I was going to bring forward, which I thought was a bold approach, given that most people think there should be solar panels on the roofs of new homes. And the way it kind of worked was I had a chat with Christian in the first place. He was really decent about it. He said, I don't know how this is going to work. You need to talk to the appropriate minister. I'll see if I can hook you up for a chat, which a few weeks after meant that I ended up talking to Matt Pennycook in MHCLG, who I would say is a thoroughly decent bloke. And he and I ended up exchanging mobile phone numbers. And then on one morning, having been put in touch with him by Christian Wakeford, Matt said, "Okay, well, come in and have a chat, and we'll talk about this." And I sort of met him in members' lobby. He then said, he sort of looked around and he was looking at the government whip's office. He said, "Oh, I think we're just going through here." And then we went into that office, and then Christian came out of that office and said, "Oh, we're going around the corner." So I was taken down out of members' lobby into another government whip's office, which looked a bit like a corridor, and then down another corridor, and then into a massive boardroom with about 20 tables around it. And it was me, a junior advisor from the Lib Dem whip's office, somebody else who I didn't know, Christian Wakeford, Matt Pennycook, and Jen Kitchen, I think. And we sort of sat around a table, and Matt Pennycook said, "Look, we like this idea. We think we're going to do it, but we can't support what you're doing on the day, because we think the right way to do this is not via primary legislation. What we think we will do in terms of the approach is a tweak to building regulations, which will be a different approach. And so if you bring this forward and you try to force it to a vote, we will have to vote you down, and it will look like you failed." Which it would have done. I could have been a martyr for solar panels, but I thought that was probably a waste of time. And then he said, "But what the way this process works is that you can present your bill, and we will, the government whips will not intervene to call a vote and vote it down, provided after a certain amount of time, which is agreed between your whips and our whips, you're happy to bring the debate to a close. You make a concluding speech after I've welcomed your bill, and then I think the advice was you then sit down and adjourn your bill."
Okay.
Which I agreed to do. It seemed like the right thing to do. I mean, I'm a Liberal Democrat. I accept that I cannot wield the number of votes to force things through. And also, as a Liberal, I like the idea of working cross-party on things and trying to find common ground. So, having led the debate and having had lots of people speak in favour of it, I ended up adjourning the debate, which means effectively my private member's bill went right to the back of the queue, and it ends up being effectively timed out whenever this parliamentary session finishes, which is presumably in about 3 weeks. But by then the government had already agreed to do what I was asking anyway, and they have been true to their word. And Matt Pennycook has always kept me involved, and I've always been in touch with him to make sure that things weren't going off in the wrong direction, and that they weren't reverse ferreting on it all, or they were deciding they were going to give the developers a way out of these regulations. And I've sought reassurance. He's always given me reassurance as and when there's been speculation that it wasn't going to happen. And he's been true to his word. So Matt Pennycook, decent guy.
But
And also, I think the process actually worked quite well.
yeah, it's a very effective, point about effective policy making and government. I suppose, did that affect the way that you engaged with stakeholders you were already talking with or engaged with? Did it affect that negotiation or those communications, and how did you communicate that onwards?
It was pretty clear when I came up with the concept that actually it had widespread support. The MCS Foundation, who were brilliant at being supportive with me, but not like bashing me over the head and making sure that they were on the front of everything. They just gave me the support that I needed. They gave my researcher the support that I needed, and worked really well with Tom Badham, who's my researcher in Parliament. And alongside them, I contacted Ecotricity, and my constituency is Cheltenham. Ecotricity is based down in Stroud, so not a million miles away. And it turns out that the chief executive is a Cheltenham resident, a guy called Asif Rahman Waller, who I've got to know quite well. So Ecotricity, as soon as I was coming out with a formal proposal and I had a bill that was written, Ecotricity supported, and they gave their expertise into it. A developer called Thacom, a private housing developer, they were the only developer that was brave enough to put their head above the parapet and say, "We're supporting." And that was, I thought, actually really impressive, because while a lot of the house building industry kind of defaults to saying, "Steady on, we don't want anything to change," even though they knew they could all do it and it was coming anyway. they can put their head above the parapet and sort of used it as a kind of a, here's our values as a business, and we support this because, we think houses need to be built and we think they need to be more energy efficient. And they gave some examples of how they were already doing it. E.ON, the energy company, E.ON Next, they backed it as well. As did Solar Energy UK or Solar UK. You would expect them to, the trade body, and the CPRE. They were very helpful in making sure that loads of people actually were emailing their MPs to turn up on the day to support the private members bill at the second reading. So I worked with all of those organisations. That enabled us to get together a few letters that went out into the media where there was sort of support for the Sunshine Bill and being demonstrated publicly, which I think helped sort of drag the government into the right position a bit quicker. We also ended up running a drop-in in Portcullis House, which was pretty well attended by a load of MPs. Weirdly, like a few, so I didn't think it was particularly controversial, but a few of the Labour MPs who poked their head around the door, they were like, "Oh, I'm not sure what our whips think about this." I was thinking. It's a bit weird to be quite so nervous about a drop-in about solar panels, but they were mostly new MPs who were coming in, and I think they were still finding their way with the whips. So we ended up sort of building support and building momentum and sort of demonstrating there was a coalition of support. The MCS had done some polling, and this again really good practice for anyone who's trying to get their bill through or their campaign taken up by an MP. MCS had done some polling which showed that every single voter group across all political parties was in favour of solar panels as standard on new build homes. It was even like it was a huge number, a huge majority of voters for the Reform Party who thought this was a good thing to do, and which kind of demonstrated that widespread political support. And it helped us with the general message that this is something that we should be doing, that we should be talking about, and that the government should bring forward as soon as possible.
Thanks, Max. And one of the questions we've had in on the Q&A, just a reminder for everyone watching, please drop your questions in the Q&A and we will put them to Max. Someone has asked what the trickiest part of the process was from being drawn on the ballot through to the actual negotiations that you had with government, and where did you require maybe more support from the organisations that were supporting you?
On the second part of the question, what I found was that the organisations that had formed part of the sort of loose coalition, so Thacum, Solar Energy UK, Ecotricity, E.ON Next, CPRE, and MCS Foundation. They basically just made themselves available and answered all the questions that I needed. MCS in particular helped with some of the technical details around the drafting of the bill. So when we were talking to the clerk, Anne-Marie, about how the bill looks and what was supposed to be in it, she was ensuring that it was technically correct in terms of the House of Commons process and the legislative process. MCS was checking it to make sure we had the right details in there from a technical perspective, and actually it turned out not to be a massively technical ask because we were just talking about the amount of space that you might need on a roof to make the solar panel array useful for the average new build home. So I think in terms of the bigger challenges, it was just navigating the sort of weirdness of the parliamentary processes. So because the whip's office, your whip's office as an MP, they don't have a direct interest in your private member's bill. So you have to be kind of walking around and working out your own kind of approach to it all. You've got to find the people that you need to talk to. So that means finding Christian Wakeford and the onward search for Matt Pennycook or whoever was the right minister. I started off by going to Ed Miliband's PPS, who sort of went, "Yes, thanks very much," and Kate White, very nice. She was also a new MP, and probably just thought, "Oh well, I'll feed this into the system," and I guess it got fed into the system, and they probably forgot about it, or they thought this Lib Dem with his private members bill is not a priority for us as a new government, which is entirely fair enough, right? So it was just trying to navigate that process was the weirdest bit. Actually, what I expected to be really difficult was the whole kind of working behind the scenes with the clerks. But because the clerks are there and they're chasing you and they're saying, we've got only X amount of weeks before you have to present your first reading, your bill for first reading, that that kind of was just a bit like being on a treadmill, because you were given deadlines, you were given dates, you were given the support you needed, and because the clerks have, they're not experts in drafting legislation, they tell me, but they can do it and they're pretty good at it. I mean, when they say we're not experts in it, I think they underplay their expertise. And Anne-Marie in the Public Bills Office was extremely good, and I'd expected that to be the most difficult bit. That turned out to be kind of an easier bit because Parliament's quite well set up for private members' bills. The more difficult bit was the kind of the political bit where you're trying to work out which politician you need to talk to and who you need to negotiate with and how you can actually get through the door of the government whips in the first place to have the discussion. And the building of the coalition bit, I'd had some experience of working in comms in development before I became an MP, so that kind of it seemed kind of a bit obvious, really. The one thing I did turn down as advice from the Liberal Democrat communications team was dressing in a Hawaiian shirt, board shorts, and flip flops, and wearing a sombrero. And walking into Parliament dressed as that with "Bring Me Sunshine" by Morecambe and Wise playing. I said that was a step too far, and despite my leader's occasional enthusiasm for those kind of stunts, I didn't think it was the right thing for me to be doing.
As much as I would have liked to have seen that, Max, maybe I do agree with you on that side of things. But maybe don't rule it out in the future. I know that you're down in Brighton for the Dem conference. It might be a good time to whack out that Hawaiian shirt and board shorts. We've got people writing in about the time frame and how long you had from when you were drawn in the ballot to when your bill was read. I know there is a typical time frame, and I think it's just over 4 weeks when Parliament is sitting. How did you spend that time, and is it all specific? I know obviously you were settling as a new MP, and there's lots going on, and I think there was a recess as well, because it was over the summer. So probably had an abnormally long amount of time to think about what the bill could be. Is there anything most or least useful things that you would recommend maybe public affairs organisations using that time to fill for MPs?
I think the draw was on the 4th or 5th of September, maybe. So it was pretty early in September, and I think by the time I presented it, it was maybe in October or the beginning of November. I can't quite remember the dates. So I didn't have an awfully long period of time to do the thinking bit. So my main advice to public affairs, campaigns, people, industry bodies is basically just start your work now ahead of the next ballot, so you're ready to go on minute one, and get your and spread the net wide across all 20 of the people who have come out of the ballot. And then go quickly, because time is of the essence. And don't forget that the MPs that you're targeting, while they've got an opportunity to do something that they probably are really enthusiastic about, they probably have 150 million other things going on every day when they're in Parliament, and loads of constituency priorities. They're trying to get into oral questions to Bob and ask a question about something going on with the local GP surgery. They're probably trying to make sure that they're doing their personal bit of interest in Parliament, because most MPs have picked a thing that they are most interested in and that they're campaigning on, or several things. So I would suggest make sure you get in there really, really quickly. And I guess also make sure you've got maybe multiple different types of pitch, depending on which MPs come out the ballot, because I don't know, some different MPs will react in different ways to different pitches, and some will like more detail, some will like less detail. I just wanted a short summary, but have your initial short pitch and have your long pitch ready to go for as soon as you possibly can, and then do all the things that I said before about effectively stalking the MPs as much as you can around PCH via email, all sorts of stuff to try to get at them. But don't follow them around in Westminster, and don't try to get. Please don't stand outside the gates of Westminster and or by Westminster Tube trying to nobble them there. That would be a bit out of order, I would suggest. But use the right methods that you will know as a public affairs person.
Yeah, one of the things that when I worked in Parliament, I stood out to me was when a pitch came in that really related to the constituency that the MP was, representing. Is that something that also stuck out to you when it came to people engaging on private members' bills as well?
Uh, I don't think I had anything that was Cheltenham specific, and there wasn't anything that stuck out as a pitch specifically that would be great in my constituency. Cheltenham has a certain, it's got sort of a critical mass of people who really care about the environment, and a critical mass of people who are probably concerned to a lesser or a greater degree with development being got right by the developers. And every constituency will have people who are concerned about cost of living and energy bills crisis and that sort of stuff. So that was why I ended up coming with my idea. The ones I rejected, I didn't reject because I thought my constituency wouldn't like it. I rejected them on the basis that I probably had a set idea in my head of what I wanted to do and the kind of campaign that I thought I could fight, which then might lead to a useful outcome, and where I could sort of demonstrate that there was support for something and something that wasn't divisive. Because as a brand new MP, I didn't want to do something that was going to be extremely divisive and have and end up with lots of people telling me, "Oh, I just voted for you, and now you're doing this thing that I absolutely hate." So that's kind of where I was coming at it from. But of course, we are, by the time the next private members bill ballot happens, going to be 2 years after every MP's been elected. So that possibly I would be a bit braver in those circumstances. I definitely would be. I'd find it easier to deal with the admin in the first instance because I have now a very good team of people who can support me and look at the emails and give me a bit of advice as well. I'm trying to think of whether there would be an example of something that would be constituency specific. I guess if you've got a constituency that's particularly, if you've got an older demographic, for example, than the average constituency, maybe you might want to look at doing something around certain things to do with older people's rights, maybe. Or if you've got a constituency that has a very high proportion of people who have come from another country, or where they've got a lot of asylum seekers, for example, where you might want to think about, asylum seekers' rights or how communities deal with large influxes of asylum seekers and that sort of thing. That could be something that would be pretty useful. Or whether you've got a constituency with one specific industry, which everything sort of hangs off of. In my case, it might have been cybersecurity in Cheltenham. But again, that kind of opportunity. Bear in mind, there's only 20 MPs on the list.
One of the things that I was particularly thinking about was if they'd done some sort of maybe polling in that constituency, or they had asked their supporters within the constituency to also maybe send you emails or get in touch with you.
I think loads of people got emails from CPRE saying show up to take part in the Sunshine Bill debate, which worked pretty well. Although I don't know how you would line that up in advance. If you've got lots of money at your disposal to do things like polling and research, certainly have that as part of your initial pitch. That can't do any harm at all if you can prove that this will be popular in someone's constituency.
Yeah. Those are I remember certainly getting a lot of those sort of campaign emails, and CPRE are a very good one at organising that. That rings true to me. You did mention that you maybe weren't approached with fully written bills, but would it be something that would be worth bearing in mind in terms of maybe getting some sort of legal support on it, or would that be more than necessary? Would that be unnecessary?
Well, some of the MPs were approached by people who had fully written bills, and so the 0 hour campaign, that was a pick up and drop kind of bill, and so Ros had an awful lot of support with that in terms of the campaign and everything else, and also it was completely drafted as a
Yeah.
bill, as I understand it. There will be and that was, I think they were sort of saying, well, the lawyers have looked at this and it's all ready to go. I think the thing to bear in mind is that if you've got legal support internally, that I guess your legal support won't necessarily know how to draft legislation using the language that the Public Bills Office will accept. But the Public Bills Office will work with whoever. You work with your office, and they will, even sit down and talk about that kind of level of detail. That support is there. They can't do all of the work for you, and they can't do overtly political things in the Public Bills Office. But I was reassured that the level of support was there. That would have meant that had I taken that approach, they would have done what was needed.
And mention on the political bit of the process, and you've sort of highlighted it and the difficulty of maybe understanding it or working around it. Was there any colleagues or other members that were involved in the process and their PMBs that maybe didn't get the most out of that political bit? And is there anything that you would, advise people to avoid, having seen it from the inside now?
In terms of the party politics, or in terms of the general sort of getting political capital out of your process?
I would say the party political bit and working with the government, or maybe you saw people missing an opportunity to work with the government, and in the end, face that bit of, as you say, being a martyr maybe for a bill.
Um, I don't want to betray confidences, but I'm aware of people whose private members' bills ended up kind of being, something that the government was never going to do, and the MP, the specific MPs, sort of saying, well, I really hope the government's going to do this, and then the government saying we're definitely not going to do this, and then there being a period of negotiation, and the ultimate outcome not necessarily being the thing that was initially envisaged.
Yeah.
And I think for those public affairs people in the room, you've got to be representing your clients, right? And you've got to be representing your organization. You've got to be making the biggest noise that you can for your campaign. If you end up in a position where the MP that you're working with isn't able to do the thing that you wanted them to do, or isn't able to get the concessions from the government, then there are, public affairs people on the call, right? They're people, and they're nice people, and they're generally pretty good at working with the system. I would just say always just remain flexible, and if you get to the end and you haven't quite got the outcome that you want, it's important to maintain good relations with your MP and keep them on board as long as you possibly can. I have heard examples of some cases where there hasn't been a falling out, but there's been a clear sort of parting of the ways at certain points, which hasn't always worked to everyone's advantage, and then you haven't even got the result that you want.
Thanks, Max. I know we're into the last 10 minutes now, so just a reminder for people, if you're going to get your questions in, please do so now. I know you said, Max, just go through some of the questions. You said that you found out who was successful in the draw when a colleague let you know. But in general, these are posted on either the parliamentary website or in Hansard. Also, if you're a Dods subscriber, we will send out the results of those draws with a little bit of bio and information about the MPs who have been drawn. So, Max, we put one together on yourself and who would be worth targeting, the top 5 or top 10. I would say, I'll ask you, Max, but as you know, the people who are at the top of the draw are the ones who are most likely to have parliamentary time given. And you were able to choose which date you would like for that Friday reading. Was there anything that you took into account for what date that you wanted to choose? Did you want to get it done sooner, or would you rather a bit more time to get that reading in place?
My main aim was to get it as soon as I possibly could, but also to not overlap with things that I already had booked in my constituency diary. And there are certain things in your patch that you can't ignore. And I had some stuff in early 2025 that was already booked on a Friday that I couldn't sack off. The main sort of negotiating point was between me and Anne-Marie in the Public Bills Office, and then her talking onwards to various other MPs. And obviously, there's a lot of moving parts when you've got potentially 20 to look at. And she's only really concerned with the sort of the ones that are likely to find some time, because what you've got behind all the ballot bills, you have loads of MPs queuing up to present their private members' bill. So Christopher Chope, for example, is the guy who is notorious for doing this, because he doesn't really agree with the private members' bill process. He presents, I think, several bills, or in some cases dozens of bills per term, and just gets them in the queue because he thinks, well, might as well prove that the process is a bit daft. And he's not my politics, but the process is a little bit daft, if I'm honest. But I think we ended up with Kim having first dibs on the date because she was top of the list. And then I ended up in a position where I was talking with the Public Bills Office and also Ros Savage, who I think was number 4, and then another MP, just to make sure we didn't both pick the same date. Because if you tell the Public Bills Office you want it on a certain date, so had Kim and I picked the same date, for example, Kim would have got nearly all of the debate time on that date, and I would have got 15 minutes at the end, and then my debate would have been adjourned, and I'd have gone to the back of the queue. Boring process point, but Anne-Marie in the Public Bills Office makes sure that the people towards the top of the list don't end up with conflicting dates. And that's quite an important part of it, because if you're attaching your campaign to an MP and that MP gets the wrong date, then you lose your chance, basically. So if you're number 3 and you pick the wrong date, or you're number 2 and you pick the wrong date, then you're screwed, basically.
That is a very valuable point. Thank you, Max, for highlighting that. Yeah, you want to make sure that your bill's got the time it needs and deserves to get the debate in on one of those sitting Fridays. You mentioned there some of the pitfalls of the process. So as we round up, maybe a bit of time to reflect on the whole process and what anything that, if anything, you think could be changed or improved to support MPs introducing their bills.
The things that I mostly took from it was that the organisations that were supportive of the Sunshine Bill were absolutely brilliant, and they were not there up in my inbox every day and phoning me every day saying, do this, do that. They were just kind of gently supportive, being regularly in contact over the sort of September to February time. And they were saying, well, here's how we can support. Here's some of the research that we've done. What do you need me to do? Should I turn up with a banner here? All that kind of thing. The CPRE took a really proactive approach, and they sort of started doing their own email campaigns and just kind of cracked on with it. And then they sent somebody to take a picture with me outside of Parliament and did a bit of their own campaigning work, and that was great because it meant that it took stuff off my list of things to do. So I would just say, from the public affairs perspective, just be kind of as gently supportive as you can. And when the MP says, "Can you give me some help with this?" Then you say, "Yeah, what do you want me to do?" And as public affairs people, you're going to do that anyway. But I'm totally certain you would do that. The main thing to bear in mind is that the MP probably has quite a hectic diary, and fall in line with what their diary requirements are. I know you would do that as public affairs people anyway, and also just make sure that you are doing the public supporty bit by throwing stuff out on your social media, on LinkedIn, using your own networks to get people behind the campaign. Take stuff off the MP's plate when you can, and then make sure that it's kind of, you're just there to do the public commsy bit as much as the MP would like you to be. From my perspective, I think probably I learned as a brand new MP that it's probably not the most convenient thing to win the private members bill ballot or come second in it when you're newly elected. There was a lot of stuff, even though I took a fairly direct approach, I knew what I was doing, and I was kind of trying to limit the amount of scope there was for things to go very badly wrong. I think there was significant scope for this to sort of dominate my first 6 months as an MP in a way that probably wouldn't have been helpful to my process of settling into life as an MP and doing what I need for my constituency, which is the first thing you need to do when you're a new MP. And I probably should have had some of the comms myself lined up a little bit better. And probably if I win next time, in the highly likely event I win next time, I will probably make much earlier contact with the government whips, and I will get in front of the minister, the appropriate minister, much more quickly. Now I know now I know who they are, and now I know where to find them all. When I came out the ballot last time, I didn't know where most of the toilets were in the Palace of Westminster. I didn't know the quickest route from the House of Commons to my office, for example, in 1 Parliament Street. So there's all sorts of stuff that I think I will be able to do better next time. And as the public affairs people, I would suggest all you need to do is just remove as much pressure from the MP as you possibly can and help them along as much as you can. And I know you all will.
Fab. Thank you very much, Max. I think that brings us to a nice close there. It's good final reflections and good to know that you'll be entering again. That was one of the questions that I had lined up for you. Is there any ideas on what you would go for again for very briefly?
I'll probably do something else to do with solar panels because now I've sort of carved out a minor niche in that area. It seems like it would be good to sort of tune it up and do something else to do with it, or maybe if not solar panels, some other kind of renewable energy. And there are a number of off-the-shelf campaigns that I'm aware of that are going on. I quite like the idea of geothermal energy. The one thing that you can't do, and I should have said this at some point, and the public affairs people in the room will already know this, but for those who don't, and I'm sorry if I'm teaching you all to suck eggs here, it can't be a money bill. You can't bring forward anything that says the government needs to spend money on this. So you need to come up with something that is effectively just tweaks to regulation, changes to something or other. So never bring forward your campaign on the private members bill with an ask of money from the government, because it's not going to happen.
Very important reflection as well. Thank you very much, Max. And just remind anyone watching that if you have any ideas for future webinars, please drop them in an email to our customer service email address, which I believe is in the comments now and in the chat. And just left for me to say thank you very much, Max, for your time, and hope you enjoy the rest of Easter.
So much, Dean, and thanks everyone on the call.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.